Morning, everybody. Or nearly good afternoon. My name is Lennart Koschwitz, and I work with an organization called Allied for Startups. We care very much about that the voice of startups is represented in politics and government, and we in particularly care about the voice of startups in digital therapeutics and health to be represented in politics and government. And the reason we do that is that we depart from the assumption that many of the innovations we're going to see in the coming years, including in healthcare, will not come from the traditional players and stakeholders that we are known to see in that space. They will be heavily involved, and obviously they are part of the innovation ecosystem, but there's a new breed of companies and there's a new breed of actors that may not have similar backgrounds and definitely do not have the same approach. Startups are all about agility as small teams that move very fast. Although when research is involved, there's longer periods of incubation, but in principle, products are launched very quickly. And instead of a medical professional, you might as well have an IT developer in front of you who's working on something that is really, really relevant to improving the lives of people. So another thing that is very special about startup companies is that their representation in politics and government is not at all natural. We see that companies, the older they get and the more, let's say, comfortable and established they get, the better their relationships are with governments and government officials. For startups as very small and lean teams, government is not at all a priority, although we believe it should be. So we're trying to bridge that gap. We're trying to involve entrepreneurs in a meaningful way to be part of the conversations in government that matter for their business. And there's a whole range of topics that you can think of in that regard. Start with the digital single market, which has been part of pretty much the flagship project of the European Union in the past 5 years. The question, how are companies supposed or allowed to treat data in order to innovate, but also to preserve the privacy and the integrity and the confidentiality of the user? How are we supposed to treat artificial intelligence? How can we ensure transparency and trust? How is data safe, secured, and how are we allowed to have data move across borders? All of these topics might not sound implicitly like pure health topics, but I can assure you that they are more than relevant. So we're wondering two things. First of all, how can we involve startups as the drivers of many of these innovations into a policy-making process so that decision makers can make fully informed decisions from day one? But also, and very importantly, how can we empower entrepreneurs to be compliant from day one, right? Because this is what we want. We want them to treat the data on the highest possible standard. We want them to have absolute, transparent, and impeccable systems when they use technologies such as artificial intelligence. So rather than saying we're lobbying for startups, as we're really trying to empower startups so they can be as compliant as possible, as early as possible. Today we want to have a conversation a bit more about, obviously, around digital therapeutics and health. And we want to talk about this with the occasion of the creation of a platform that is called Allied for Startups DTX, and it's a platform that is open not only to startups, but startups are really our prime customers here. Startups in digital therapeutics and digital health that can enable them to be part of the policy-making process more effectively, but also be in touch with all the health management professionals that we have most of you here today, the corporates, the universities, everyone who is part of this innovation ecosystem. So you'll find some more information on the platform, and I think we'll be speaking about it a bit more in the leaflet. We also have some handouts in front of the room, right in front of our roll-up, and I'll be around for any of you having questions. But without further ado, I want to invite our three amazing speakers and guests today. we have Anna Maria Hennel, who is the founder of Disior. And I'll ask you in a second a bit more about what you guys are doing. Please come up on stage. I want to invite our second entrepreneur, Moritz Matschke, who's one of the founders of Well IT and spends his time between Berlin and London. Please come up. And we're very glad and happy to have Dr. Sari Palojoki from the Finnish Ministry for Health, who is also has an extremely rich background in companies and clinical trials as well, and she's working right now to prepare the Finnish presidency, which is going to take over on the 1st of July. So give me a first round of applause for our amazing speakers. Thank you very much. And without waiting any longer, I'm going to start with Anna Maria. Tell us a little bit about Disior, about yourself. What are you guys up to? And what I'll also be curious to know is, how do you perceive the role of government, as well on the national, but also on the European level? And has there been some major roadblocks or good things that you think you've seen coming out of government? And how's your relationship with people working there?
Very many questions. Yeah. So Anna Maria Hennel, I come from a startup company called Disior. We are 2.5 years old. We do software for clinicians and surgeons. It's a software to analyze medical images, so CT scans, MRI scans. Our first applications are for orthopedics analysis, so for fracture detection in facial area, for example, foot and ankle, wrist, spine, so all this orthopedics related. We also do soft tissue analytics related to brain injuries and stuff like that. So the point of the software is that it turns those images into numbers, so numerical values, so data. And that data the clinicians can use for precision and repeatability and quality in the diagnostics phase, in the treatment and surgery planning, to plan that how do I actually fix this person, and also to the follow-up phase, to how efficient was my treatment. And that is kind of moving it away from today's practices that you treat individual patients based on your expertise, what you have gained over the years, to more of this data-based analytics and diagnostics, so that the information that has been collected all over the place can be used for your patient's benefit. So it's creating actually a basis of data that you can build up treatment practices and so forth. So that is what we do. The basis for the company, we are not, as there has been a lot of discussions where these people come from and where innovations come from. So we came from a totally other industry area, so it's ICT area, and we had no idea of medical technology whatsoever. And it has been really a ride from these 2.5 years ago, that we were like butterflies, that yes, we have this great technology, we can do everything with the images and so forth, and then down to the thing that, okay, we have this regulation thing, and we have this market thing, and we have the hospitals are really hard to work with, and so it's been a really kind of, we cross all the hurdles that there is. So in that sense, it's really hard to come from the outside. In a sense, for your question to the authorities and the governmental things, I think we have it has been okay. So I have been kind of seeing not that many kind of obstacles from that side. Of course, the regulations are there, but as we deal with treating people, I think regulations are good. So we need to be the validation, and all that data needs to be there before we can actually treat humans. I think that is good. Of course, it would be great to have a bit more support from the authorities on how we can fulfill those regulations, because today it's really expensive consulting business that they tell us this much, this is what you don't know, and then they tell that come to us and pay us and we give you the information. That is one really kind of a big thing. Otherwise, working with kind of university hospitals and these public hospitals, it has been great for us, but it requires us a lot of work to be getting into the hospitals. And from the governmental point of view, I would love that you somehow reward those hospitals that do the validation and the research work with startups, because today the reward to the public sector hospitals and those clinicians who work with us, they work extra hours and they work really hard. They just do it for the love of the thing and just to keep things moving forward. There is no kind of incentives for them to work with that. So that would be actually the second thing I would bring up.
Great. I think that's two very, very interesting points. Just give us a few more specs. How big is the team?
Yes.
You said you've been founded two and a half years ago. How big are the team? Are you active only in Finland right now? What are kind of the plans in terms of internationalization?
Yes. So we are around 15 people today. We are in all university hospitals in Finland, pretty many in Central Europe. We are in the US, in the Latin America, so we have this piloting hospitals all over the globe, which tells about the kind of uniform problems that all these have. So it's kind of really highly scalable in that sense, and I think they can benefit from each other's work. And we are backed up by VC money. We've done 3 financial rounds, or 2.5 almost, to back it up. As you know, it's really a long way to do to get kind of things up and running.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And may I ask the audience to hold your questions just a little bit longer, but feel free to note them down already. And I want to bring in Moritz. And there's a very interesting point that Anna Maria made that we actually spoke about yesterday on the bus ride to the dinner, which is kind of, well, we had the example of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and we really got stuck at this point around that, well, now it's here, we all have it, it's written in law, but what we're really missing is kind of guidance, because I think everybody wants to be compliant, but not everybody knows how to be compliant, including some of the authorities who are supposed to, let's say, govern and police the whole regime. So would you agree to that point? And please give us the inclusion of Well IT and what you guys do.
Yeah, I think one of the major points with the European legislation and all that is that the people should be really first. And I missed that many times. And therefore, it's very difficult to find solutions if you don't put the citizen, the patient, the consumer in the driving seat, so to say. So I prepared a few slides. Might I open them? Or? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our slogan is really empowering people, because it's not necessarily just about products or about pharmaceuticals or about IT technology, but it's really about the patients and to help them the best way possible. So I wrote down together those 4 points, so I have a few baseline assumptions for the presentation. Then I would walk you through a solution which is existing to help people with cancer. It's about an information system, and I would go a bit deeper for the aftercare services. From the aftercare services, I would come to the point to how to integrate patients with applications, how to monitor them, how to engage them, that they might change their behavior, and what role AI plays in that sense, and then outlook. So first of all, I'd like also to ask you at that point what your expectations are towards startups. So maybe you can have a few seconds of thought about that. Yeah, and let's play a little bit before we start. So what you're seeing here is basically how the European and perhaps also the African healthcare system looks like. You have a lot of conversations about telephones, about fax machines, and about very confusing and not really good communication processes. So what do you think you're seeing here? Any assumptions? No? Who thinks that's a soccer stadium? No, that's not a soccer stadium. That's the headquarters of Apple in America. Last year they made a profit of about $20 billion, so to say. I have another picture for you. Do you know what that is? No, who thinks that's Heidelberg? No, that's not Heidelberg. It's the headquarters of Huawei, and they had a profit of about $9 billion last year, so to say. So just to put a bit in perspective, the big technology companies in the world. So we have some baseline assumptions for, it's not working anymore? No?
There we go.
Okay. So why would we need to put the patient in the center of our processes? So what I learned in the last days in the conference is that we reach higher growth rates in general through putting the patient in the center. It would also protect perhaps the existing model of a welfare state, so to say, where we all depending on. And yeah, it could also help us to achieve IT champion status somehow in Europe and being a responsible and sustainable IT company. And last but not least, also it has to do, I think, with a lot of problems concerning people coming here from foreign countries, from other healthcare systems, where the monitoring and all that is not as good as it is in the good old Europe. So let's get further and let's have a look on our solution about the information system for cancer, for oncology. So that's a very, very pragmatic German-style system, so to say. From the IT perspective, one would not call it really innovative because the technology used is quite old-fashioned. But what it really cares about is the compliance for processes. So the system in Austria and Germany, Switzerland is highly regulated. The CCCs, the cancer centers, have to follow all these regulatory processes, and it really helps them to stay content-wise aligned to the processes. So I think that's somehow where we're coming from. We're coming from that it was done on paper like 30, 40, 50 years ago, and then those processes evolved and went to the first IT generation, which was done in the 1990s, or even before that. So therefore, it's not really fancy IT, but it's a system what helps people saving time in the processes. It helps the doctors to be more efficient and to get waste out of the system through the right documents at the right time. Also, a very, very important process is the aftercare process for the patient. So what about all the time wasted from the doctors, from the clinicians to do the aftercare for oncologist patient, so to say? This is a really, really time-consuming and very, very difficult process. So this is a focus where we see a lot of demand from that perspective. And that's also a process where the patient could really help to interact better with existing IT infrastructure. So that's why we built on top of that the mobile patient guide. And it gives interactive information, it gives checklists, it really gives the information to the patient, it gives the communication tools about scheduling, about his check-in processes in the hospital, but also what has to be done in the next coming year, so to say, how is the follow-up. So that's what we're doing. That's on the right-hand side. And on the bottom of the page, you see actual projects where we are engaging in the moment to come to the next level, from the empowerment to the co-creation, where we work together closely with patients to increase their health literacy and to get to even to the next level and even closer to the patient and towards his good health, so to say. So what's next for us? Well, one thing I was missing here a bit in the conference was really the very focus on the patient. So that's why I decided to put up a very personal picture from my family members, and we have one family member, so to say, he has ALS. And his brother died already a few years ago. And when I think everybody should have a personal picture, so to say, for himself, why we're doing all that here. And I think really the patient should be in the center and should be integrated, might it be in the family or in other communities, to really get the right content and get the right help for him, and not just about the IT, but also about the integration of those people.
Fantastic, yeah, thank you very much. And I think that's a striking account for also where startups can help decomplexify things with the aim of allowing doctors and professionals to actually spend more time on the things that really, really matter, rather than filling out compliance forms. So I want to thank our two entrepreneurs for their accounts and sharing their views and backgrounds and stories a little bit. And I want to bring in Sari with a government perspective. And you also brought a few slides to explain a little bit of what you're doing and what the priorities are. And I think one question I put to you as well is, what are your experiences with working with startups, and what would you personally like to perhaps change or try out in the future? So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I wish to thank you very much for this invitation and this opportunity to participate in this great event. I want to state at first that at the ministry, we are having one person that is much more involved in technological issues, but I try to do my best in this area, however. But before showing the slides, I want to comment on your experiences at first, because you, what comes to DCR, you brought up very many actual issues regarding the governmental cooperation. And I think that at the ministry level, nowadays we understand much better that trends are changing more quickly, and it is also sort of prerequisite for policymakers to follow these new technological trends, which wasn't necessarily the case during past days. So what comes to the startups in general, we understand them more or less like they are fuel for our economy. So we value your operation very much and want to listen to you. But of course, you stated that the regulators have their role. We have also our authority role, and that just have to be done. I used to be responsible for patient safety for HUS for many years, and I truly understand those issues. But definitely we should, one of our very basic tasks at the governmental level is to give guidance for companies, for everybody that is asking, and that should be perhaps more practical, I would say. That is my experience also. So we do have new directives, new laws, everything. It is constantly changing environment, so we should do it much better. And what comes to the GDPR specifically, I came just from the EU policy level, and also other member states are struggling. For instance, Germany is struggling very much how to interpret the GDPR regulations. So we have to somehow find explanations for practical solutions what comes to GDPR. And I would like to comment on the patient perspective. I would have very many opinions on that, but to put it short, I think that we do have European level understanding that the patient perspective is vital. And we do also have work packages in the area of e-health issues where we want to empower people. And part of that are different kinds of solutions for patient, e-health solutions for patient empowerment. But we have done lots of things, so I would like to show very, very short slide show.
If you want to, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. And first of all, when we think about the Finnish environment, we are happy to have health sector growth strategy. Definitely we need a direction for developing the ecosystem. And Finland has stated already 2014 in cooperation with the Ministry of Finances and other ministries to build up an environment where we are, this is perhaps a little too much to be a dynamic operating. There is much to be done so that government can be dynamic, but that is truly a good goal. We try to change the environment, at least in Finland, very, very much. And another thing which I want to show that Finnish government is investing over 30 million euros for personalized medicine research, innovation, education, and data management centers of excellence. That is a very, very important part, doing things better with, for instance, startup companies. And there is still one thing that we truly think that we should act together, that we are building the health ecosystem together with the citizens, companies, authorities, and other parties. And government is backing, for instance, access to digital health data. You probably have heard that Finland was the first member state in the European Union that accepted secondary use law 1st of May. And it is a very good starting point to facilitate, for instance, startups' innovation work. I gave a presentation at the ministerial high-level meeting last week in Bucharest, and it is a huge interest there how Finland is actually tackling this secondary use idea. So we will follow up this issue very closely. And another thing is also that Finland is developing test beds. It enables research and innovation organizations to join this ecosystem. Nowadays, we do have medical devices regulations, which are becoming much more strict. So we need environments where we can test different kinds of medical devices, even software, in order to show those requirements that they are fulfilled. So Finland is having network and basic infrastructure for testbed environment. These are the practical examples which we are doing at the governmental level. And then I have an example of current activities. Artificial intelligence was, you mentioned it. We are having program for AI and robotics. And this is just one example. It looks like that, well-being and health Airo, Hyte Airo. And we try to speed up the utilization of artificial intelligence and robotics and eliminate obstacles with startups. And when we think about artificial intelligence specifically, I want to bring it in a broader perspective. And in April, the guidelines for ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence were published in Brussels. So it is also, I see, it is good, broad starting point for a good discussion. So to be honest, so we are doing pretty much things at the governmental level and in the European Union. But to stop this slideshow, I just reflected what could be done better at the policy level. It is collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration, definitely. We should create an open culture and share knowledge and experience. You mentioned the platform, which is definitely one solution where we can operate, but I think that there are a variety of meetings and conferences. For instance, I wish to invite everybody to Slush. In the end of year, we are going to have EU presidency meeting there too, so we are going to have many governmental partners there too. You can share your opinions there. And I think we should have more test beds, living labs, this kind of thing, which would brought us forward with these issues. That was pretty much, in a nutshell, what I wish to share with you.
Great, yeah, thank you very much. And I think that's very interesting to see. I think there's a clear indication that governments are already doing a lot. And there's particular reason to be excited, I think, about the Finnish presidency when it comes to health. In a previous panel, we discussed that, for example, literacy is also very much an empowering aspect when it comes to digital health. And I'm extremely happy to see the test beds. They're also sometimes called sandboxes, and we hear this word more often on the Commission corridors, so that's very, very encouraging for us as well. I want to pass it on to the audience, and there's been already a couple of questions for you, and there's definitely been one by Moritz about your expectations. But I also want to ask you to reflect upon a point that Anna Maria was making when she said, well, the actors, the institutions, the hospitals we work with need to get some sort of incentive, reward, appreciation for the fact that they work with startups. And I think there's no better place than this conference to collect some thoughts and feedbacks on that. And please feel free to raise any question you have for the panel as well. There's a microphone floating around. Do I see any hands going up? Yes, there's one here in the front.
Hello, I'm Michael from Switzerland. My question is, how much are those big international American internet companies really holding back startups, and how is the government in the respective states able to really encourage startups to really become big?
That's a question, I assume, especially for our two entrepreneurs. The question is whether American companies do hold you back in any way, and what governments could do to encourage you more?
You want to go first?
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah. So I think it's a quite general political question you're asking. So I know one case where a big American company, so to say, got a big contract with an insurance company in Germany. And everybody I asked didn't know anything of their cooperation, of the tools, or whatsoever. And I would say I'm an expert in that field. So what about if you ask the little man on the street or the patient on the street? Well, there was a huge contract, to help your health and to make your life better. And that's the whole topic, so to say. So it's about the communication and about things done behind closed doors, so to say. which is a big problem, and which then also causes insecurity. And when I talk to Germans, many of them already gave up on the idea of getting the system better, through e-health or all that. So that causes then many bad follow-ups, so to say. So that's a big problem, I would say. So, but specifically, you would not say, I got a big company and they're not treating us well or so. So they're very friendly, but the whole atmosphere is a bit, let's say, poisoned.
Great. Anna Maria, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, because I would also take some responsibility to the startup side as well. So you can always kind of blame the government or the regulations or the big guys or whatever. So in a sense, I feel we need to work really hard to be better than anyone else. So to beat by our knowledge and our technology and our thing. I know the world is playing by the big players and how life is currently doing, and that's why I think we also need to be very specific. We need to be very good, and we need to be not exactly on the point. Also, it is a bit related, even though the test beds and everything are really good, but I have just my personal feeling that they are not that much for co-creation as such, so that you can go there and create something great. You need to be, in a sense, quite ready when you go there, and then you test it and validate. But in a sense, to be really co-creating something new, it requires a bit deeper collaboration with clinicians and those ones who work with. So, for example, we did work for a year, 2 years, directly with clinicians, and we needed to be so good in what we did so that they were willing to take up their time and cooperate with us. That we were really needing to show the added value of our thing in relation to anything existing in the world. So it kind of brings out the responsibility on what you are offering. And also to find that space outside of the official sandboxes to be creating something new. And also, I think just as a comment to the GDPR and the regulations related to the data. So in a sense, as our field is images or medical images, they are not something that people share or in any population health database or anything. They are kind of in the hospital, and I respect that. I think it's okay. So we needed to find a way how clinics can work together without sharing the exact imaging data to each other. And then we created a system that our software actually doesn't transfer any patient data or anything to anywhere. It just takes out the data that is needed for the analysis, and for that data you can then build across the clinic. So you need to also be clever to work with the current regulations and then build on top of that so that you can live today, because time is money for us and we die if we don't do something that can be out there in the market in a short term. So that's why we need to find kind of clever ways also ourselves to be there with the current ones. And then we can say here that it would be nice if at some point this would be changed to something else. But we need to live in the meantime as well.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate your comments very much. I think there's been also two parts of your question, sort of, should policymakers rather focus on kind of trying and police situations that they find perhaps might be not going in the right direction, or should they be working on encouraging ecosystems and encouraging entrepreneurs? And I think as Allied for Startups, when we're working with our members who are 45 startup associations, not only in Europe but globally, this is really much what we hear. We hear that and that policymakers should definitely focus more on how to encourage and how to foster newcomers rather than how to perhaps think about individual cases that they don't see going into the right direction, right? And I think it's important to consider that startups usually do not have these lawyers of armies of lawyers that they can send out to solve regulatory issues, but our approach should really be to enable them to be compliant as well as possible. Do I get other questions? Do I get maybe a feedback on how to incentivize and encourage hospitals on working with startups? Anything else for the panel? Yeah, there's one question right here.
Hi, Mark Lloyd Davis from Johnson & Johnson, a large American multinational company. I just wanted to maybe revert to the previous point that, and startup panelists up there, that there is also a positive role that large companies can play to be supporting startups. So I'll give you an example that we've invested in. So we have something called J Labs, which essentially is a no strings attached agreement, no contract signed, no obligation, no equity, and no involvement in the startup. And they can use our facilities for essentially a peppercorn, very low rate, in order to have as a venue. What you may say, well, what's in it for us? Well, what's in it for us is the water cooler conversations or the coffee corner conversations to understand where the latest innovation is. But there are no legal attachments or involvements whatsoever. And we recognize in order to remain innovative, it's critical. Most innovation happens from startups. Most innovation happens from academics. Most innovation happens from outside. We can play a role in curating that and fostering that so we can be there when the innovation begins to scale. But there are examples where I think companies can play a very positive, strong, contributing, mentoring role, and it's not about legal contract, we will sue you, we want to own you, or we want you out the market. And I think there needs to be a balance brought to that sort of mindset of thinking. And I loved your comment, startups aren't stupid. People who run startups are smart people who take risks, and they're not just going to be, oh, I'm going to get easily taken over by this other company. So I think we need to sort of bring that balance to the conversation.
Thanks a lot. I was hoping for that kind of contribution to come in. There's definitely more positive examples that we can see than negative. And I think there's also, as you underlined, a very vivid discussion around this. There's world traveling fast if one of the incubators isn't perceived to have a favorable or fair terms, or others are perceived to be doing extremely well. So the way we perceive startups are definitely aware of these things. Yes?
I have a thing. So exactly on top of that, so also when you are a startup and you create, for example, a software, so to be actually for the patient's benefit, it should be as easily integratable to the current system as possible. And there, I think the big players come also into the picture. So we also collaborate with a CT manufacturer, so imaging device manufacturer, a plate, some kind of these reconstructive plate manufacturers, because you are in the system already. And it's a really not that efficient from anyone's point of view if you add on specific stuff on that. So exactly to the point, so we need to collaborate in a sense that then startup ideas can part of the existing process. I was just kind of saying in the first place that you need to, in order for a startup to have a great companionship with a big player, we need to be unique as well. So there needs to be an added value from our thing to the existing process, because us, as we are kind of also kind of valued to something and we collect the money, so our name needs to be there so that we get the valuation that we need to have from our work. But exactly, it needs to be collaboration in the end to benefit us all.
You see the collaboration theme is being picked up more and more. Are there any contributions from the panel? Are there more questions? Because I think otherwise we can also turn a little bit, and I think it's been implicit in our previous conversations already. And Moritz, you mentioned it during your contribution. There's an immense economic argument behind this, and I think there has to be two elements that are extremely dear to my heart that I would like to raise. And of course, we're doing all this work around startups and with startups because there is an economic promise. But there's also a very famous and very popular figure out there of failure. And I think we all know in the meantime what a good thing failure is. But I think it's also worth to look at that a bit more in detail. If we say that 9 out of 10 companies fail, startup companies fail, I think it's also interesting for us to think about, well, what does failure actually mean? What happens in these 9 companies? And how do the founders perceive that? How do the teams perceive that? And how do the ecosystems perceive that? I think because there's definitely these kind of water cooler conversations. They happen even if the startup fails, obviously. So there's a certain kind of spillover and education effect. So if I could ask the founders to reflect on that a little bit, I mean, the question is there still a reason for government to act, although 9 out of 10 fail, and why?
I think there are 2 worlds. There is the IT world, where every failure is, let's say, perhaps deadly. And then you have the research done in academia, where 99% there is failure. In the biology, in the chemistry, so these 2 worlds are not. They're just different worlds, so to say. So I appreciate failure as something where you can start learning, and I mean, human behavior is not logical at all, so to say. So if you would say you need the perfect solution straight away, that's impossible to deliver. So you need time, and you need to be devoted to the goals, and it's a mindset thing much more, and money fuels the process, so to say, but it's not a means by itself.
So learning and mindset. So right. I think Anna Maria wanted to.
Yes. Yeah, if we can say on the failure thing, so. As life is diverse, right? Also, startups are diverse. So there is many types of startups doing very many things, and yes, most of them fail. I would love to see in a way that the money, as I think it's important, the government also as Business Finland here in Finland backs up startups from money perspective, and I think that is the greatest thing. We could also somehow concentrate on the science-based. So because I think work doesn't go to waste. Research doesn't go to waste, even though it is a failure, the result may be, but the research as such doesn't go to waste. So I would love to see the backing more, or especially on those kind of companies who bring up the data for the next generation to use. And as for a personal opinion of my company, if it would fail, I would love to see the baby fly somewhere. It doesn't have to be me or in my arms or anything, but I would love to see that the work that we do is building it up in somewhere else, at least, if not with us.
Fantastic, yeah.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Definitely those experiences which we get from the failures too, so those have to benefit it. Definitely, it comes to the area of secondary use data also, because we have been figuring out, visioning our future, for instance, what comes to different kinds of clinical tests, whether we could combine those previous trials or processes with the clinical data in order to use it more efficiently. Yeah. Do you understand? So that it isn't wasted, that kind of information. So it can be benefited for future purposes too. Yes.
I think that's a very crucial point that we've been seen with and around data. The moment we collect it, the moment we do the run one experiment or one trial, at that point in time, we not necessarily see what else could there be in the future. For those of you familiar with the GDPR, there's pretty much a thorny question around consent to be solved. But I think there's definitely a point. I'm browsing around the audience the last time to see if there's any comments. Otherwise, we would wrap up and ask the panel to provide a few closing remarks. And I think from my side, what I would definitely like to say is thank you all for joining joining the panel already. Please do keep us in mind if there's anything about startups that you heard today that made you curious. If there's any startups that you would like to get in touch with, if there are ways you wonder how to get in touch with startups, or if you're a startup founder yourself and you're curious in politics and government, please don't hesitate to find us. And for the panel, is my closing question pretty much open? Anything you want to pass on today, or what is kind of one concrete thing that you would like to see within the next 6 months? Up to you to pick one of the questions.
Well, I think events like this are great to bring up the topic that how can we help each other. I know nothing happens in a day or overnight or anything like that, but the keeping it up is good. And I said each individual company as a startup and so needs to take care of themselves as well to be as clever and as good as we can. I would love to also, by the kind of the startup organizations, as I have learned, for example, personally, 2.5 years hardcore medtech bringing up to market. I would love to be some sort of that we would have a network of not angel investors, angel startups that would give out the knowledge that, hey, don't make that mistake or that mistake. I know there is different kinds of accelerators and things, but on a general level, maybe as a food of thought for you as well, that could there be some sort of an alliance on that.
We definitely want to share best practices in the group as well, and I'm definitely signing you up to that already.
A good practice of establishing a digital therapeutic company suggests that you would need about $200 million to do so. So we are still in the fundraising process, and I'm very open to talk with you about that. Thank you.
But no American companies.
Perhaps today, because many of the audience are coming from other member states, I would like to stress the importance of the EU digital single market strategy. So I would encourage you to be very active, to participate different kinds of commission meetings when it is possible, to have discussions with governmental people, so that we get the information regarding what are the problems actually. Well, otherwise, we are just sitting there in an office and yes, exactly. So we don't truly understand those challenges, which. Yes, and we are starting our Finnish presidency for the EU, so there are plenty of meetings, so please come there and discuss openly. So I think that is a good starting point.
Fantastic. There's two things we like to say at Allied for Startups. One is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and this is what we want to pass on to our startups. But there's a second thing, which I think is much more fitting for today, that really good things happen when entrepreneurs and policymakers speak to each other, and I think we've seen that on stage today, and it's definitely the beginning of a conversation rather than the end of it. So join me in giving a hand of applause to the panel.